Hi, Rabbi. Hi, Naomi.
Hey, Steve. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you.
I would say the same, but you're not showing your picture tonight.
Oh, you're right. I never do. I like to be the voice of Charlie's Angels.
I like what Rabbi Lana said about Goya.
Yeah.
The food, the Hispanic food place.
That what?
The Goya, Goya.
Uh-huh.
Because my wife always makes fun of the name.
Yeah, it's a funny name.
I'm going to mute myself.
I'm waiting for your black hat.
There it is.
Yay.
Hello.
Love your hat, Steve.
Thank you. It was a special request by your daughter-in-law.
Oh, okay. Well, looks good on you.
Where's my son?
Yeah. It's a daughter-in-law. That would be Nomi.
I know who my daughter-in-law is. I know who two of them are. Do you have the
You can look French too.
what?
You can look French also.
Oh, yeah, that looks good. I don't know. Maybe the black hat looks better. I don't know. Oh, that's nice.
I could be a pirate.
Yeah. Let me see your hand. It was a hook or not. You know.
Or a bandit.
Oh my goodness. Oh, here comes the music.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another one of Rabbi Landis's Tuesday night Zoom sessions. It is such a pleasure to have you all here with us tonight. In case you don't know me, I am your host, Pinchas Landis, Rabbi Pinchas Landis, and it's a pleasure to have everybody here for the Life and Legacies of Jewish Queens. Tonight is the 7th in our 8-part series, and we are discussing the topic of Bernice. And just in case anyone decides to drop out before the end, and we will share this again at the end, I want to share our upcoming series that this series will conclude next week with the topic of Judith and Beta Israel. And then the following week, we will begin our next session called True Religion, Righteous Converts, where we will be focusing on many of the righteous converts throughout Jewish history. And that'll begin December 8th. So we'll show this again at the end of the class, but that's our upcoming series that you can get excited for and psyched up for. We originally mentioned something about Coffee Talk being on Tuesday nights, but Coffee Talk will be on a different night of the week. It's going to be a whole new program we're launching at a different night, and we will continue to have these history, philosophy, more in-depth Jewish topics for our Tuesday night classes. So that's the plan for the next coming days, and I just look forward to sharing it with you. So with no further ado, let's delve into the topic of Bernice. Now, I'm going to make an assumption, and we all know what happens when you make an assumption. It makes something out of you and of me. But nonetheless, I'm going to make an assumption that before tonight's session, no one on this Zoom call or on the Facebook Live or the YouTube Live or anyone watching, wherever they're watching, no one has heard of Bernice. So, I get to enlighten you as to who exactly she was. And let's start first with the background as to the time period that we are in, so we understand exactly who we're talking about and what is interesting about her and why we are talking about her. So one of the most infamous characters, I forgot to turn on my camera. Okay, so this will be on Torah Anytime live a little bit later. So we want to welcome those watching on Torah Anytime. Okay, we officially turned on the Torah Anytime camera. One of the most infamous characters in all of Jewish history, or better than infamous, I think I would say one of the most tragic characters in all of Jewish history, is none other than a man by the name of Herod the Great. Now, he gave himself that last name, the Great. Most Jews do not call him Herod the Great. But if we take a look at his life, as we'll do, we'll take a brief, 1 or 2 minute look into his life. We'll see in truth, there was much greatness in his life and much terribleness in his life, many terrible things about his life, therefore making him one of the great tragic figures of Jewish history. It's actually very interesting, and this was not planned directly when we scheduled these classes, but yesterday was actually the yahrzeit of Herod. So it's interesting that now, literally 24 hours from his yahrzeit, we're going to be discussing him and his descendants. So who was Herod? So if you recall from last week's session, for those of you who are with us, we discussed the enigmatic ending of the Hasmonean dynasty, leading to Chanukah 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks from Thursday night. The Hashmonaim, the Maccabees, the one who fought the Chanukah War, started off as the saviors of the Jewish people, literally brought the Jewish people back to the Beis Hamikdash, to the Holy Temple, rededicated the temple, were the ones who were able to fight off the Greeks. Again, it took them about 25 years. That's something they don't always tell you in Sunday school, that the temple was rededicated in the first year of the war, but still about 24 more years till the Greeks are out of Israel. But by the time the war comes to an end, it's a very interesting switching of roles, and that the ones who were the victors, the Hashmonaim, the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, all synonyms, all the same people, were in many ways more Hellenized than the Hellenists they were fighting to begin with. We mentioned last week in talking about Salome, Shlomo Alexandra, I'm sorry, it was 2 weeks ago, talking about Shlomo and Alexandra, we talked about the family of Yochanan and Hyrcanus, the family of Alexandriani, and we spoke about how it was a family that had become what we call Sadducees, had become Sadukim, which was just the new form of Hellenism. And after Shlomsion's life, after it came to an end, we knew that her sons were not cut out for the throne of Judah, but eventually, after she dies, they at least try to take over, and they go into a civil war with each other. That is perpetrated by the oldest son, whose name is Hyrcanus II. Again, only Greek names we know of these people. And the younger, but more, we'll call it more wily, more stronger, probably more talented son, Aristobulus II. Now, this civil war goes on for a very long time. It's a terrible civil war for the Jewish people. And in the process of the civil war, one of the failed policy decisions of the Hashmonaim comes back to bite them. What is that policy decision? That is, under the rule of Yochanan Hyrcanus and probably carried on through the rule of Alexander Yanai, the Jews in Judah practice forcible conversion, forced conversion. So we always like to say in Jewish history that that forced conversion, well, that's something that the Christians did. That's something that the Muslims did. That was never a Jewish thing. That Jews don't believe in forced conversion. We don't allow forced conversion. Conversion has to be a choice according to Judaism. You know, blah 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 blah. And that is all true. I don't mean to blah 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 it. That is all true. Which, by the way, is a nice segue to the next session, the next series we'll have on righteous converts to Judaism. But be it as it may, this was a dark point in Jewish history where through the conquering and the conquest of the latter Maccabean kings, Yochanan Hyrcanus, Alexander Yanai, they forcibly converted the non-Jewish tribes that came into their wake. And we're going to see that almost or really does pave the way for the destruction of the Second Temple. How so? One of the nations that is forcibly converted by the Maccabees, again, for anyone just coming in now, we're not talking about the original Maccabees that we celebrate in Chanukah. We're talking about the fourth and fifth generation, the latter Maccabees, who do not have a very happy ending. So one of the nations or tribes that is forcibly converted by the Maccabees is a tribe known as the Idumians, not to be confused with the Edomites, but the Idumians. Now, I'm going to bring up a map of what Israel looked like in those days, or really, as we mentioned before, it was not called Israel, it was called Judah. Because during the whole Second Commonwealth, the country is called Judah. It's never called Israel. It's not called Israel from the splitting of the northern and southern kingdom during the First Commonwealth until modern times. So if we look at these maps, these show our three major maps from the three major time periods of Jewish history. This is at the time of the conquest of Joshua and roughly the whole First Commonwealth. Now, again, it does split that Judah down here becomes a split off and the rest of them become the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. But this is basically during the whole First Temple over here. This is at the rule of the Hasmoneans. It started off with this very light pink at the beginning of the war, the Chanukah story. That's Judah. If you can read this, maybe we'll make it a little bigger there. Right, so when Judah Maccabee, the famous Judah Maccabee is the ruler, this light pink is all he conquers, really just Yerushalayim, Yericho, Jerusalem, Jericho, this area over here. Already by his brother, Yonasan, it expands to this slightly darker pink color. And then Hyrcanus the first is Yochanan Hyrcanus. We have the lighter red. Hyrcanus the first, and then Yochanan Hyrcanus is the darker red, and Alexander Yanai finally is a really dark red. So we see over here that under the rule of Yochanan Hyrcanus, that this area is conquered. And the people that was living in this area was known as the Idumians. And so the Idumians lived within Israel, because Israel at that point had been taken over by the Greeks. So a lot of non-Jews living in Israel, a lot of non-Jewish tribes and nations. So we have the Idumians living down here, and they are forcibly converted by Yochanan Hyrcanus to become Jewish. Okay, one last thing about the maps before we turn them off, just to juxtapose it on the map of modern day Israel, that this map, right, this part right here, I think here, one second, let's get a little, 1 second here. Here we go. This map here, or this part here, right, from the time of they were talking about, would fit nice and snug right over here. Right, so that gives you a modern day picture that the country of the Hasmoneans was in many ways much larger than the country is today. Again, you'll say, but we have the Negev today, we have the South, but the South, let's face it, is not so, it's a desert. And the Maccabees do build ports in Eilat, and they do build transportation going all the way down from here, but they just don't, the land's not inhabitable, so they don't conquer it. But they do conquer and control much of Syria, much of modern day Lebanon, much of modern day Jordan. That's all part of the Hashmonaim Empire, the Hasmonean Empire over here. Okay, so that's our little geography lesson for today. I'll be happy to send that out to anyone who's interested in it. Part of this conquest, though, was that they practiced forcible conversion. Now, again, you might ask the question, how do they do it? But I partially answered it before, that these Maccabees by this point are not the Maccabees that started off. They're doing a lot of things wrong. So yes, they're forcibly converting, and that is definitely a bad thing. That is not a Jewish thing to do. But be it as it may, it is what they practice. It is something they practice, and one of the many things that they do wrong. Now this is going to be, who ruled Ashkelon, since it looks like, no, Ashkelon was ruled by the Greeks. It was never conquered by the Greeks. Ashkelon and Caesarea, that area, and Haifa, that area was always controlled by the Greeks and the Romans. It never went under Hasmonean rule. So you don't see Caesarea in that map. Or actually, I'm sorry, Caesarea. I messed up. Caesarea is in that map. It's much more north, but those are both Greek strongholds during most of this time. Okay, I sent the link for the map there in the chat box if you want to look at it. Anyhow, okay, so back to the Maccabees. So they forcibly convert the Idumians, and one of those people who comes from the Idumians is somebody by the name of Antipater. Okay, so Antipater is a forced convert from the Idumeans, and he becomes the very close friend, trusted advisor, the rainmaker, puppeteer, whatever term you want to use, to Hyrcanus. So again, remember, Hyrcanus II is the older brother, the older, weaker brother, and Aristobulus II is the younger, stronger, more wily of the two brothers. But Antipater is the one who kind of runs the show for Hyrcanus and constantly provokes the civil war, even though there's times when Hyrcanus falls in war to Antipater and a treaty is made. Antipater provokes Hyrcanus to go back against the treaty, and he basically keeps the whole civil war going. Now, Antipater is basically like a cat. The guy has 9 lives, because no matter what happens next, he is going to come out on top. Because we're going to see in the end, the Maccabees come to complete destruction, that Aristobulus is going to be killed. Hyrcanus is eventually going to die, and we're going to end up with someone on the throne of Israel who is not from the house of the Hashmonaim, but in fact, in a moment, we'll see who he was. Okay, don't want to spoil the next part of our class. So Antipater, in the whole, in the negotiations and the diplomacy that he puts into practice for Hyrcanus, while Hyrcanus is actually on top in the civil war that they have, he is always reaching out to Rome. Now, Rome at this point in history, we're now at circa, we'll say about 1020 BCE, within the last few decades before the Common Era. Rome is now becoming the new power on the block. Greece is basically vanquished at this point, and it's clear that Rome is the new power to reckon with. And in the Civil War, both sides appeal to Rome to come to their aid. Now, who's in charge of Rome at this point? Initially, it's Pompey. Okay, I don't know if you know Roman history. You don't know Roman history, I'll pretend that you know it at least a little bit. I know you know who Julius Caesar is. We'll get to him in a minute. But Pompey initially is the one who is in charge, because we know that Pompey and Julius Caesar are initially part of a triumvirate. They're initially part of a government together. And Pompey is conquering the West from the Persians and the Greeks. Julius Caesar is conquering the East. And it looks like Pompey will be the one in charge of Israel. So Antipater, on behalf of Hyrcanus, Aristobulus, the Sanhedrin, all the Jewish powers that be, appeal to Pompey for their support. In the end, Pompey throws his support behind Hyrcanus/Antipater and says, okay, you're the one I trust. Aristobulus, forget about that guy. The rabbis, Sanhedrin, don't know if I can trust them. You're the one I trust. When I come to power, you're going to be my agent in the land of Israel. Lo and behold, we know what happens. Pompey never really comes to power. He eventually, as many great Roman governments and triumvirates, as what happens with all of them, is they eventually have an internal struggle amongst themselves. Pompey and Julius Caesar go into a civil war. Julius Caesar becomes the stronger of the two. He has the support of a much stronger military than Pompey has. He chases Pompey all the way to Egypt, and Antipater and Hyrcanus change allegiances, throw their support behind Julius Caesar because they see that he's the one who is most likely going to win. And not only that, but when they appeal to Julius Caesar, they say, yeah, we know that initially we supported Pompey, and usually the allies of your enemy only have one option when the war comes to an end, and that is, but they said, you know what? We think we're your best option in Judah. Be with us. And I said, fine. Julius Caesar said, you'll be my guys. And just to show you, says the Jews in Judah, our support for you, with your war against Pompey, we're going to ask the Jews who live in Egypt, because there's a strong Jewish community in Alexandria of Egypt at this time. We're going to ask the Jews in Egypt to fight on your behalf. And the Jews of Alexandria, the Jews of Egypt, become decisive in the war between Julius Caesar and Pompey. And in the end, we all know what happens. Julius Caesar is successful. He's the one who's victorious in that war. Pompey is put to death. And they change the name of the role of emperor to his last name, to Caesar. They add a month to the calendar, July, name it after him, Julius July. By the way, if you ever wondered why we are in the month of November, which would seemingly in Latin mean the 9th month, and the next month is the month of December, which would mean the 10th month. That's because that's how it was before Julius Caesar. There were only 10 months in the Greek, Roman, Latin calendar. And then Julius Caesar added in his own month, an 11th month that he called July. And his eventual successor, Octavius, changes his name to Augustus, puts in a month also named August. So that's where our 12-month calendar comes from. And they want to be nice long months in the summer, so they push the short ones off a little bit. And the 7, 8, 9, 10, September, October, November, December become really 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, a little calendar lesson for you. You never know what tidbits of information you're going to get from Rabbi Landis. So there you go, something about the calendar. Okay. Julius Caesar is now the Caesar, is now the emperor in Rome, and what he does is to try and keep those Jews from rebelling, because they all know what the Jews have gone through with the Greeks for the past 3-4 decades at this point. So he divides the country of Judah into different regions, into different states, cities, whatever you want to call them. He leaves Hyrcanus and Antipater in charge of Jerusalem. He takes Antipater's 2 sons, okay? He takes Antipater's 2 sons and puts them in charge of different parts of the country. And then he puts some other Roman generals in charge of 2 other parts. So we have this kingdom that I showed you before, bring it up one more time in case you didn't look at it in the link there. But this kingdom that we showed you before is divided up into roughly 5 different areas. So again, we got Jerusalem. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. One second, I picked the wrong drawing tool there. Let's try it again. We have Jerusalem, which is basically Antipater. We have these 2 regions, which go to the 2 sons of Antipater. And we have this region and this region, which go to different Greek generals. Okay, and that's what happens. Now, we all know what happens to Julius Caesar, at least if we saw the Shakespeare play or read the Shakespeare book. And some of that is probably historically true. Some of it's not. Not sure if Julius Caesar ever said et tu, Brute, or not. I'm not exactly sure. It's, not exactly sure if it was just Brute, aka Brutus, who killed Julius Caesar. According to some accounts, it was 65 of the senators who came after Caesar. Again, different accounts. We don't have a clear account as to exactly the demise of Julius Caesar. One thing we do know is that he did have a terrible demise at the hand of a rebellion that was perpetrated by the senators in the Roman Senate, who became jealous of the power that he was yielding as he was starting to take Rome from the Republic to be an empire. Okay, when he dies, we have then Mark Antony and Octavius, who form a triumvirate. And Mark Antony initially takes over the West, goes down to the West, puts his palace, his station as his head of government in Alexandria. He marries Cleopatra. We have Octavius, who stays in Rome, Italy, that part of the empire. And eventually, as previous governments happen, they will also have a falling out and lead to civil war. But back to the Jews for a minute, because this is a Jewish class. What happens when Mark Antony becomes the the one who's in charge of Israel. He supports the policy of Caesar. But what's interesting is Cleopatra, his wife, hated Antipater and therefore hated Hyrcanus and wasn't too fond of the Maccabees and really was pressuring Mark Antony to get rid of that government and to change it and to really just make it all under Roman rule. But when Antipater, again, remember the Idumian, forced to convert to Judaism, when Antipater comes to Mark Antony, even though I'm sorry, it's not actually Antipater comes to Mark Antony, it's Antipater's son, the one who's controlling the Galilee, the Galileo, who comes to Mark Antony to appeal on behalf of his family. And he is the one that Cleopatra hated. And Mark Antony eventually realizes that the guy's worth more to him alive than he is dead and says, okay, you know what? You're going to be in charge of everything for me. And that person's name is Herod. Okay, so our famous Herod, aka Herod the Great, the person whose family we're really focusing on tonight, he was the son of Antipater. And Mark Antony basically says, you're going to be my guy in Israel and go back and take over. Now, what happens next is the civil war between Mark Antony and Octavius and Augustus. And we all know who was victorious there, at least if you know your Roman history. Who was victorious there was, of course, Octavius, who becomes Augustus and becomes a Caesar, becomes Caesar for a very long time. We're going to see virtually almost until the destruction of the Second Temple, until a few decades before that. Rules for a very, very long time, probably 20, 30 years. He is the emperor of Rome. Now, Octavius / Augustus, we have another issue here, because again, we have now the situation that Herod, the family of Antipater, sided with Mark Antony, the enemy of Augustus. And again, your enemy, the ally of my enemy gets put to death. So Herod basically, through the pressure of Augustus, through his allies of the Parthians, who basically take over Israel for a short period of time, push out Herod, push out anyone who was with Herod and who was with Mark Antony, and put the land of Israel under the Parthians back in the rule of Augustus. Now, Herod at this point is able to run away, is able to flee, is not caught. He makes his way all the way to Rome and meets with Augustus, reveals himself. He says, I'm Herod, don't kill me, because I think I'm worth more to you alive than I am dead. So therefore, I want to work with you. I know I sided with Mark Antony before. Now I'm on your side. At which point, Augustus recognizes the talents of Herod. And he says, you know what? You're right. I'm keeping you alive. And I'm putting you back in Israel, not just as governor over the Galilee, not just as governor over Jerusalem, but you are going to be the king of Judah. You are going to control an empire the size of which the Maccabees before you ruled, that was previously divided up into these 5 different sections. You're going to be the king, but you're my king. You're a Roman king. You're there for me. You're not there for the Jewish people. And they made a service in Rome. They sacrificed a pig. He participated in it. We'll talk about his Yiddishkeit in a minute. And he goes back to become the king of Judah. So now we have a very interesting situation. We have a king on the throne who just brought a sacrifice to the Roman god Jupiter, or Zeus, no, Jupiter, right? Jupiter in Rome. And we're going to see what kind of Jew he is for a moment. But he is there with the blessing of the Roman emperor, and he is now the complete king of Judah. Now, we mentioned how he's one of the tragic figures in Jewish history for many reasons, and many questions come up about him just at the beginning, that just to get the understanding of who we're dealing with and the family we're dealing with tonight, we have to address these questions. First of all, was Herod Jewish or was Herod not Jewish? That is the question. To be or not to be a Jew? That is the question. And it's complicated because we have basically a couple of different forces, a couple of different issues that we have to grapple with to figure out if he was Jewish. First of all, as we mentioned before, the Idumians were forcibly converted. Is somebody who's forcibly converted Jewish? No, usually not. Because as we'll talk about again in our next series starting mid-December, one of the main pieces of becoming a Jew, someone converting to Judaism, is that they have to choose to be Jewish. They have to want to be Jewish. And therefore, when we say forcible conversion is against Jewish law, it's not just against Jewish law because we don't like it. It's against Jewish law because it doesn't work. So it would seem that Antipater, the father of Herod, and Herod were not Jewish because they were forcibly converted to Judaism, and therefore that would be a problem. Now you might say that wait, but 1 second here. What about his mother? Well, his mother was a lady named Cypros who was from Nabatea, and it's unclear. It's unclear if she converted, didn't convert, forcibly converted, practiced, didn't practice. Not so sure. So Herod has a big question mark over his head as to whether or not he was Jewish. Presumably, he was probably not a Jew through conversion. But we have another famous story in the Talmud that tells us a little bit about his lineage, and through this we'll figure out about the other players we're going to talk about tonight and their lineage. And that is, when Antipater's rule starts to strengthen and Herod's future is recognized and his talents are recognized, Antipater, knowing that there's a question on their yichus, that their lineage is not so clear, he wants to put away that question. So what does he do? He makes a political marriage between Herod and a lady by the name of Miriam. Who is Miriam? Miriam is Jewish by birth. And not only is she Jewish by birth, but she is the granddaughter of Aristobulus II. In other words, she's the granddaughter of Aristobulus II. She's the great-granddaughter of Shomsana Malka, the great-great-granddaughter of Yochanan Hyrcanus, and so forth and so on. She is a Maccabee, right? She's a descendant of the Maccabees. So Antipater, to give validity to his son's place and eventually his throne, marries him into the family of the Maccabees, and so to speak, at least tries to give him some validity. It seems from the writings of Josephus and the Talmud that Herod truly loved Miriam, but the feeling was not mutual, as you can guess. Miriam did not truly love Herod. And if she naturally didn't love Herod, we're going to see there are many episodes that help to distance her even more from her husband. And one of the things that Herod is infamous for is that anyone who threatened his rule, he simply murdered. Now, officially in Rome, that was not allowed. And that was really, you could not, even as a king, as a Roman governor, as a political official, whatever you were, you did not have free reign to kill whoever you wanted in the Roman Empire. It still death sentences had to be handed out by the Senate. And Herod regularly violates that. And not only that, but anyone from his own family who threatened his throne, he knocked off. So he kills Miriam's brother. He kills the rest of Miriam's family. Any of the last of the Maccabees, he kills out. And he even eventually kills his children that came from Miriam. Okay, so at a certain point in the story, and it's a terribly tragic story, but at a certain point in the story, the only people we have left essentially are we don't have any of the direct descendants of the Maccabees. We don't have any direct descendants of any of it. So Miriam, getting to the point where she has finally had enough of Herod, stands up one day from a tall building and announces, I am the last of the Hashmonayim. I am the last of the Maccabees. With me will die the great house of the Maccabees, and anybody who claims to be a descendant of the Maccabees is nothing but a slave. And she jumps off the building and kills herself. That's one account. Another account is that she tried to kill herself. She was not successful, and therefore Herod had her arrested and tried for treason and put to death at a guilty sentence of treason. Be it as it may, she is dead. Now, let's examine her words for a minute, because that'll be very important for the rest of our players tonight. What is she saying? She's saying that anyone who claims to be a descendant of the Maccabees is nothing but a slave. Now, what is a Jewish slave for a minute? It's actually a terrible mistranslation, because in Judaism, I don't want to say there's no concept of slavery, but definitely the secular concept, or what typically comes into our mind when we think about slavery, the Jewish concept is very, very different. So it's very important to make the distinction, and that's why I often don't even translate the word as slavery. The Hebrew word is an eved for a male or a shifcha for a female, and I think the term indentured servant is a lot better. There's two general categories of indentured servants, and that is Jewish indentured servants and non-Jewish indentured servants. Jewish indentured servants are usually trying to pay off a debt and have a maximum sentence of 7 years, and they're always sent out in the Jubilee year, the sabbatical year, unless they choose because they love their master so much to stay longer, and then they stay for the Jubilee year, the 50th year, and then they go free. Okay, that's the Jewish indentured servant. The non-Jewish indentured servant, there's no time period given to his or her servitude, but something interesting does happen. In order for them to become a Jewish indentured or a non-Jewish indentured servant, and Eved Kanaini, Shevcha Kanainis is the Hebrew words, they have to, if they are male, get a bris milah. If they are male or female or anything in between, they have to go to the mikveh. And they had to accept upon themselves all of the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah that are not time-bound. So they're exempt from the 7 time-bound commitments, 7 time-bound mitzvahs, 7 time-bound commandments, and are obligated in the other 606 commandments. So, in other words, this non-Jewish indentured servitude is actually a form of conversion to Judaism, which is what it was in antiquity. And that's why when we look in 2 weeks ago Parsha, and we talk about people like Hagar, and we see how she's a maidservant by Sarah, she was converting to Judaism. She was a student of Sarah's. This was her way of converting into Judaism. So that's essentially when we talk about a non-Jewish slave, a non-Jewish servant, Eved Kanaini, Shevcha Kanainis, whatever term we use, that is a way of converting to Judaism. Now, what happens when the person is eventually freed? Do they go back to being a Gentile? No, they become a full-blown 100% Jew at that point. So the Eved or the Shivcha, the non-Jewish indentured servant cannot marry a Jew. They're not yet a full-fledged Jew. They can marry other indentured servants, but they cannot yet marry a Jew. Once they are freed, they are full-blown Jew. If they are male, they'll be obligated in all the time-bound commandments and be able to be counted for a minyan, etc. They are Jewish at that point. So it is a form of conversion to Judaism. So let's now examine Miriam's last words. She says, anybody who claims to be a descendant of the Maccabees is just a slave, an indentured servant. What was she implying? That my whole family's been wiped out. The only one left who claims, or the only ones left who claim to be from my family are through this man Herod. Herod is an Eved. Herod is a slave, a Jewish indentured servant. The status of being a Jewish indentured servant passes on from father to son. So if you are an Eved Kanaini, a Jewish indentured servant, you have children, your children are now Jewish indentured servants until they are freed. And that's the only way they become full-blown Jews. So Miriam was essentially saying that the status of these people, these Idumians, is that they're not full-blown Jews. They did not convert to Judaism. As we said, they were forced. So therefore, if they're not full-blown Jews, what are they? They're avadim. They're the slaves. They're the servants. Therefore, they're only quasi-Jews. They're half-converted Jews. They're partial Jews. And therefore, anyone who claims to be part of my family is a descendant of really Herod, and therefore is an Eved, is a slave. That's what it would seem is meant by her words. There's only one technical problem, and this is dealt with by the medieval commentators. And if you're paying attention to my words before, if I wasn't talking too fast, you might have picked up on it. And that is that I said a Eved Kanaini, this status, we'll call it the non-Jewish slave, the slave who the partial, the quasi-Jew, cannot marry a Jewess. They can only marry a non-Jewish slave woman. So how is it? On what pretense did Miriam and Herod marry in the first place? Again, it was a political marriage. It was probably forced on Miriam. That's what it seems like to us from everything we read about her. But still, practically, how did it work? So the Talmud tells us that if a Jewish woman marries a Eved Kanaini, a non-Jewish slave, even one she owns, and the act of that marriage, that is the freeing of the Eved Kanaini. That is the freeing of the slave, therefore making him a full-blown Jew. That is what happens when a Jewish woman marries a Eved Kanaini, a non-Jewish slave. So if we say that Herod's status was this non-Jewish slave, Miriam marries him. In so doing, Herod becomes free, making him a full-blown Jew. in which we'd have to interpret Miriam's words to say that it was just colloquial, that, yeah, that basically, okay, he was Jewish, but like, you know, that's what this is the stock you're dealing with now. Okay, so bottom line is at this point is that the family, it seems to us that Herod was basically Jewish, again, didn't live a very Jewish life. And the family that we're dealing with now is the descendants of Herod through Miriam, the ones that survived. There weren't a lot, but the ones that survived. And we're going to be talking specifically about a person by the name of Aristobulus the fourth, and Bernice, the first Bernice. And we're going to jump down to their child, Herod Agrippa I. Herod Agrippa I was the grandson, seemingly, of Herod Agrippa I. I say seemingly because one of the things that Herod was infamous for is the guy had more wives, concubines, partners than you can imagine, and nothing stopped him from the bedroom, basically, when he wanted to be with someone, whether it was a family tree or not. And quite often, the family tree of Herod has no branches, and so there were those theories that Herod Agrippa was not only the grandson of Herod, but even the son of Herod. Quite possibly, who knows? But we're going to pick up in a moment with Herod Agrippa I. I do want to pause now for station identification and any questions that we might have at this point. This, again, is the backdrop of the family we'll be discussing tonight, the family of Herod. And we're going to now get to our heroine, or maybe not so heroine, Bernice, in a moment. So any questions? I see there's something in the chat here. Yeah, good point. That's a very good point. I agree with you, Mikhail, that the map is the Google map. I think that's where I took it from. Or it is a map that marks Judea, Samaria as the West Bank, and that is not the Jewish perspective. The Jewish perspective is that is very much part of Israel. I agree with you. Sorry, I didn't have a better map. I apologize for that. As Chatane Mazkir Yom, as we would say. Okay, any other questions about anything we covered so far, about Herod, about Herod's lineage, about anything about the Maccabees, the demise of the Maccabees, and the situation we find ourselves in now in the land of Israel? Okay, so either I have, as usual, utterly confused everybody, or I've been so clear that you just can't wait for me to go on and talk about what's next. Okay, let's keep moving. How did the Jewish people deal with, excellent question. That's where we're going now, Deanne. Excellent question. How did the Jewish people deal with Herod as king? So Herod is a very tragic figure, as we said. He has many great things, has many terrible things. He killed thousands of people. Anyone who was in his way, he killed. He killed thousands of rabbis. He actually put something in his last will and testament that on the day that he passed away, that thousands of rabbis and heads of Jewish families should be killed because he wanted to make sure that his day of death, his Yortzeit again, which was yesterday, would be a day of mourning. Luckily, that directive was given to his sister, and his sister had mercy on the Jewish people, and it was not carried out. On the flip side, he was a great builder. Now, many of his buildings he built were just for his own self-aggrandizement. He built many palaces. We don't have his actual palace in Jerusalem anymore. We don't know where it is, not been located, but we do have many of his satellite palaces. If anyone's ever been to Herodium, that was one of his satellite palaces. If anyone's ever been to Masada was one of his, that was his summer retreat on in the Judean desert, down by the Dead Sea. If you've ever been to Caesarea, the port of Caesarea, the amphitheater, the hippodrome in Caesarea, that was built by Herod. If you've been to Hebron, which, Mikhail, part of Israel, if you've ever been down to Hebron, to Hebron, and you saw the building on top of the Cave of the Patriarchs, that was built by Herod. If you've ever been to something in the Old City referred to as Migdal David or David's Citadel, not the hotel, but the one in the Old City that is not the Tomb of David, it's not. It's just a shrine, if you will, that Herod built in the Old City. In the city of Jerusalem, that was built by Herod. And we know when we see Herodian stone, it's very easy to tell Herod's building projects because he did a very nice thing for us. And that is he put his signature on every single brick of every single building that of every single building project that he worked on in Rome. So it's a very nice thing that he did for us. And I'm going to bring up a picture here in a moment so we can see it together. So this right here is the side of one of Herod's building projects, and the buildings that he built. And you'll notice that every stone has this, like, I don't know what you call this, I'm not an architecture guy, but this like frame where there's like a frame chiseled out, and the rest of the stone, the 95% of the rest of the stone protrudes forward. And you see every single stone here, at least with the ancient stones, has the same thing, right? Every single one. So if you're ever in Israel and you see that stone, you know that you're looking at a Herodian project. That was Herod's signature, and to the best of our knowledge, the only person ever to do that in history. So we see that throughout the ruins that have been uncovered in Israel. As I mentioned, there's some holy places, the Cave of the Patriarchs, the temple. Herod rebuilds the second temple, trying to ingratiate himself with the Pharisees, with the traditional Jews, with the rabbis. So he's very much a tragic figure. There's a love-hate relationship with Herod. People just love to hate him. No, I'm just kidding. Sometimes you hate him, sometimes you love him. You don't know what to make of him. So it's complicated, Deanna. It's complicated to see how the Jews responded to him. In general, the Jews did not like his bloodshed. But on the flip side, he did bring a lot of prosperity and wealth and financial stability to the country. He was like absolutely crazy. He was a megalomaniac. He was a narcissist. But the stock market went way up, and there were a lot of jobs, and the unemployment rate went way down, and the military is very strong. I'm sure you've never seen a leader like this, right? But so the Jews kind of took the good with the bad, and kind of like today, we make our decision based on the good or the bad when we see leaders like this. That was how the Jews at that time looked at Herod. For the most part, he's remembered as a tragic figure because he had his ups and his downs. He's a bloody murderer. He's a tremendous builder. He did a lot of good, and he did a lot of bad. Okay, so I hope that confuses you even more. So now let's get to his family. He has succeeded initially by his son Archelaus, and Archelaus had all of his good traits and none of his bad traits. I'm sorry, all of his bad traits and none of his good traits. Archelaus is a terrible king. Archelaus is not a descendant of Miriam. Archelaus is a descendant of one of his Samaritan wives, and therefore had no pretense of being Jewish. And he was terrible, bloody murderer, killed tens of thousands of Jews, and eventually the Jews appealed to Rome to get him thrown out. Now comes our friend Herod Agrippa I, the grandson of Herod, or son of Herod, right? As was the case with many of the children of the Roman governors throughout the Roman Empire, their children did not live in their governing in the country they were governing with the parents, but they were sent back to Rome to be educated in Rome. Now, in many ways, this was an insurance policy against rebellion. There was that they would basically the children were captives in Rome, but they weren't really captives because they were treated as royalty and they hung out with the other royalty. But it was indoctrination. So you have Herod. Herod himself was educated in Rome, and Herod's children, grandchildren were the same, were educated in Rome. So you have Herod Agrippa, who was educated in Rome, and while he is educated in Rome, he becomes friends with many of the Roman emperors that succeed Augustus. He becomes friends with the crazy Caligula. He becomes friends with Nero, and he becomes not only friends but best of friends with Claudius. And not only that, but he helps Claudius to ascend to the throne, and he's Claudius's confidant, he's Claudius's advisor, very close to Claudius. And as a return of favors from Claudius to Herod Agrippa I as Claudius gives Herod Agrippa Judah with the title king, the whole empire, back in the way that it was at the time of Herod, because in roughly the 20 years between Herod and the grandson, Herod Agrippa, the country is under only Roman rule, and it was almost falling apart in a situation of anarchy. But Herod Agrippa comes back to Israel, and he's a very interesting character because in one sense, as we just described, he's very much a part of Rome, very much respected by Rome. He is there with the blessing of the Romans, appointed by the Romans, and the Romans are happy with him there. On the flip side, he lives his life as a traditional Jew. We see that he's friends with the rabbis. We see that he bolsters the Sanhedrin. He bolsters the study of Torah. He himself practices Judaism. We see that he practices a mitzvah in the Torah known as Hakel, which is a mitzvah where the king of Israel comes on the holiday of Sukkot to read the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Devarim. And he lives his life as a traditional Jew and is very much respected by the rabbis, by the laymen. He is a beloved king, the last great king of the Jewish people. Didn't really deserve to be king because he wasn't from the house of Judah, and he's only there with the blessing of the Romans. He's a Roman king, but on the flip side, he's a traditional Jew, and the Jews are very happy with him. But when Herod Agrippa takes leave of this world, his son comes to power, Herod Agrippa II. And Herod Agrippa II is a throwback in many ways to Herod. Again, more of the good than the bad. We're going to see a little bit of the good, but more of the bad. And Herod Agrippa II has a sister, the daughter of Herod Agrippa I, Bernice, our queen for tonight. Finally, we're in our last, third of the class, last quarter of the class, and we finally get to Bernice II, Queen Bernice. Now, Bernice was an interesting lady. Now we're circa the year 40 of the Common Era. We're in the fifth decade of the Common Era, and when we meet Bernice, as told to us by Josephus, that she initially marries a wealthy Jewish merchant from Alexandria. Again, we mentioned before the Jewish community in Egypt is still there. He is the nephew of the famous Jewish philosopher Philo, and this is her husband. He dies after 3 years into the marriage and leaves her childless. She then has a short-lived, then she marries her uncle, who's known as also Herod. And Herod is given the role of Kohen Gadol. Again, is even Jewish. He's not Jewish because he's from the family of Herod, but whatever it is. He's given the role of Kohen Gadol, of high priest, by her father, when her father's still alive. And they're married together, and basically a political marriage. And he is the sort of the governor, controlling the Galilee, but he dies again shortly after they're married. So Bernice is not having a lot of luck in marriage. First husband dies about 3 years in. We have her second husband / her uncle die maybe a few months into their marriage, at which point now we have Herod Agrippa II, who is in charge. Herod Agrippa I is gone, and he's controlling the kingdom. And Bernice moves in. The widowed twice sister moves in with her brother. Now, here's where things get interesting, because Herod Agrippa II, unlike his grandfather Herod or great-grandfather Herod, who married anyone he could or slept with anyone he could find, to our best of our knowledge, Herod Agrippa II never marries. And the fact that he lives with his widowed sister as a bachelor in his castle for all these years, many rumors start to swell that they, in fact, have an incestuous relationship, which, again, was not uncommon for the house of Herod, or for the family of Herod. But they themselves decide they want to dispel these rumors. They don't want to, so to speak, come out of the closet with this, with such a relationship, because even though it was practiced by the family of Herod, it's definitely not smiled upon. So she meets a man, a friend of Herod Agrippa II, by the name of Marcus Antoninus Pliman Phythodoros. It's quite a long name. Who comes to visit his friend Herod Agrippa II on vacation in Tiberia. Bernice meets him. They fall in love with each other. Now, this Marcus Antoninus Polemon Phythodoros was the direct descendant of Mark Antony and the only known direct descendant who bore his name. And a shidduch is made between the two. Again, when we're judging the religious nature of the people we're dealing with, we hear stories like this and it leaves a big question mark. Before Bernice marries this Marcus Antoninus, she insists that he be circumcised. She insists that he convert to Judaism because it would be pasnished. It would be beyond her to marry a non-Jew. So he gets circumcised. He converts to Judaism. This great wealth of Rome is married together with this great wealth of Judah, and the marriage is made. But it doesn't last very long, as was the case with all of Bernice's marriages. Again, this is husband number 3. If you want to count her brother, it's lover number 4 that we know about. And eventually he returns to Rome. In so doing, abandons Judaism, and according to many accounts, according to the many of the Roman accounts and Christian accounts, he actually converts to Christianity. So that's what happens to this Marcus Antoninus, the one who converted and goes back to being Christian. At which point, Bernice moves back in with her brother again, with Herod Agrippa II. Now, at this point, things are falling apart in the country of Judah. Again, we're in roughly the year 50. As we know, the temple is destroyed in the year 70. We're in the last 2 decades. Things are not good. Herod Agrippa II is not ruling in any significant way. No one likes him. Rome doesn't like him. Rome is basically taken back over again. And Rome has even sent Greek governors to govern the land. And when we look at the Greek governors who governed the land of Judah, the country of Judah at that time, one was worse than the next. They all were out for their own self-aggrandizement, for building their own coffers of wealth. And we're going to see that it's those Roman governors who really provoke the great revolt of the Jews against the Romans. One of the most infamous of those is somebody by the name of Pontius Pilate. You might know about him if you know anything about Christianity, but Pontius Pilate was one of the Roman appointed governors over Judah, who's again a greedy, selfish schmuck, we'll call him, just to keep it Jewish. And all of these governors really are the ones who provoked the war. And eventually there's a faction of the Jews who rebel against the Roman governors. Now, and the initial rebellion, and the first role of the rebellion, or the first step of the rebellion, this is roughly, and I'll give you the year here so you know what we're talking about. This is roughly the year. When's the first one take place? I had it here in my notes, but now I'm not catching it with my eye. So roughly the year 60-ish, somewhere around there. So, and when the first rebellion breaks out, Bernice and Herod Agrippa II are able to escape the marauding rebels and hold themselves up in their palace. And they actually appeal to the Jews. They appeal to the Jews. They say, please do not rebel against the Romans. We'll take care of the situation. We'll appease the Romans. We'll make things better. Please don't rebel against them. And they turn to the Romans. They say, please don't kill the Jews. We'll calm them down. We'll put this thing down. We can take care of this. Now, Herod Agrippa II and Bernice had been terrible regents until this point, and Roman had taken over and knew that they were basically impotent to do anything. So neither the Jews nor the Romans trust Bernice or Herod Agrippa II, and the war goes on. The rebellions go on. The rebels initially throw the Romans out of Judah. At which point the Romans send their strongest in the names of Nero, Vespasian, Titus to put down this rebellion. And the classical Roman way of step-by-step, slow and strategic, taking over one area at a time, laying siege, destroying the population, taking over one town at a time until they make their way to Jerusalem and wipe out Jerusalem, destroying the Second Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era. Now, what happens to Bernice and Agrippa and Herod Agrippa II at this time? So Bernice actually disappears from the pages of Jewish history at this point. Now, when we say Jewish history, we're talking about Josephus. He's the only Jewish historian of the time. So when we're talking Jewish history, we're talking Josephus. Bernice is not mentioned again in Josephus's pages from this point on. From this point on, we have to look towards Roman history to see what happens. And we're going to look now as our main source of the rest of the story is Dio Cassius, the great Roman historian. Now, it's interesting. You can ask the question, why is it that Bernice disappears from Josephus's pages? Because Josephus is very thorough, and it's very rare that he begins a story and doesn't finish it. And he tells us everything we told us up until this point about Bernice. Why is it he just forgets about her? Simple answer, and I'll tell it by way of a story. The first Roman general to come to Israel is Vespasian. Vespasian lays siege, is able to take over all parts of the country, comes to Jerusalem, lays siege to Jerusalem, and during the time period of his siege, word comes from Rome that the Senate has voted him in as the Roman emperor. So he says, great, I guess I'm out of here. And he goes back to Rome, takes his place as the emperor of Rome, and leaves his son Titus in charge of Israel, of the siege of Israel. Titus is able to complete the siege, break through the walls, destroy the temple, kill almost 97,000, kill almost 100,000 Jews, take another 100,000 into captivity in Rome. But Bernice and Herod Agrippa II are considered allies of Rome and are protected this whole time. We're told by Dio Cassius that during this time period, a relationship happens between our woman who couldn't hold down a marriage or relationship until now, Bernice, and none other than Titus. So again, was she Jewish? Was she not Jewish? We see there's no demand made of Titus to convert to Judaism, and it wouldn't have been answered had she demanded it. But we do see that that Dio Cassius records that there's in fact a romantic relationship between Bernice and the likes of Titus. Okay, Titus finishes destroying Israel, goes back to Rome, roughly the year 70, 71, somewhere around there, has his victorious march, builds the Arch of Titus, and the rest is history, so to speak. For a reason we don't know, Dio Cassius does not tell us the reason. Bernice and Herod Agrippa wait until, or do not arrive in Rome until the year 75. So it takes them about another half a decade before they make it to Rome. But we are also told that they are given positions in the Roman government. So they're at this point totally Roman. No interest in being Jewish anymore. Totally Roman, and they're given positions in the government. We see that that Agrippa becomes a government soldier, a government officer. We see that Bernice becomes a judge, and not only that, but we see that her relationship with Titus picks up where it left off, and they continue to live almost as husband and wife, not officially, but that type of relationship. She is the treated as in many ways the princess, the daughter of the daughter-in-law of the emperor Vespasian, and that's the relationship. Now we see something very interesting happen before Titus assumes the throne in 79, and that is Bernice is sent away. Bernice is sent away because she was a suspect in Rome, because she was a foreigner, because she was not a natural-born Roman, because the Jews, there's just been this bloody war between the Jews and the Romans, and we know there's going to be two more to come with eventually the Bar Kokhba revolt and that bloody rebellion. But so Bernice is not to her what's it called? Her approval rating in Rome is very, very low, and she's eventually sent away. Now, when Titus becomes emperor in the year 79, we see that Cassius tells us that she is brought back to Rome, but there's concern that his standing is still a little flimsy, and she still has that low approval rating, very unpopular. So she again is sent away. And we understand again from Dio Cassius that the plan is that when his rule is more secure, the plan is for her to be brought back to Rome, to be officially married to him, and to be the queen of Rome. Which would have made it interesting that here we have a lady, again, according to Josephus, I don't know if I made this clear before, but Bernice and Herod Agrippa II rule Judah as co-regents. So she is a queen regent. She's not just the sister of the queen, she's a queen regent for a period of time. And she could have ended up being the queen of Rome. But we see that she never makes it back to Rome, and Titus dies in the year 70, 2 years later, in the year 81, and there ends her hopes of becoming the Rebbitzin of Rome, right? The queen of the Roman Empire. So that's the story of Bernice. In many ways, again, a tragic story, as many of the stories of the family of Herod. In one sense, she seemed to be a traditional Jew. She insisted that Marcus Antoninus convert to Judaism. On the flip side, and we see that she initially defends the Jews, trying to quash the rebellion of the Romans, or the Romans to retaliate in that whole situation. On the flip side, we see she ends up being the girlfriend and the mistress of Titus, who himself destroyed the Second Temple, built the Arch of Titus, killed 100,000 Jews, probably killed almost 1 million Jews, brought 1 million Jews into slavery. Like that's like you're saying that she went from being the Rebbitzin to marrying Hitler. Like that's what happens with this lady. So do we look at her as a favorable character in Jewish history, a betrayer of Jewish history? I've given you the facts. I'll leave you as a judge, but that is the story of our Queen Bernice, the lady in Rome, the mistress of the Roman emperor. And with that, I thank you very much. Questions, comments, concerns? Let's see, in the chat box here. So none of the descendants, these two kings that ruled after Herod. We have Herod, who has the title of king. We have Herod Agrippa I, who has the title of king. It's basically the last king of Judah. Because after that, it's all Roman rulers until the temple is destroyed. When the temple is destroyed, the country is in complete control of Rome. And that's basically the case for the last few decades of the Second Commonwealth. For the last few decades of the Second Commonwealth, it's a complete colony of Rome. There's no Sanhedrin, there's no Jewish court. That's the situation of Israel in those days. So that's what we have over there. Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns about anything? An awful story for sure. This is the end of the Second Commonwealth of Israel is as I always say, and many great Jewish historians say before me, if we could survive that, we can survive anything, because it is definitely the most bloody, despicable time period of our history. The civil wars that were fought, the Jew against Jew, the brother against brother. Like, we think we have a hard time now. What we're dealing now as the Jewish people is a cakewalk compared to what the Jews dealt with at the time period of the destruction of the Second Temple. Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay, so next week we will wrap up our series with the story of Judith and Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jewish community. And the following week, and you're going to start to see this advertised, we're going to have our new series of True Religion, Righteous Converts. And you can see the course load or the subject matter there. We're going to start on December 8th with The Stranger Who Sojourns among you, conversions in Judaism 101. Then we'll get to the first converts of Judaism. We'll deal with Ruth, the mother of the Messianic dynasty. Then the scholars from Rome. There are many great Roman converts we're going to cover, because while the time period we covered tonight was a terribly tumultuous time for the Jews, it was also a time where there are many converts to Judaism, which will not just forcible converts like Herod's family, but actual converts to Judaism. Then we'll jump up to Valentine Patolki, known as the Ger Tzedek, the British aristocrat, Lord George Gordon, and none other than Warder Crescent, the first consulate to Jerusalem. So it'll be a fun series we'll do together. That'll be starting not next week when we wrap up this series, but the following week. And I wish you all a beautiful week and look forward to talking to you more next week. Thank you very much.
I have a comment.